Hello everyone and welcome back to Promotional Whitenoise and our journey through the top 121 video games of all time, according to me. The pace of change has quickened somewhat as we move into 1993. The TV debuts this year aren't as high profile as Gladiators or The Big Breakfast, but you probably remember some more understated additions to the background of your life.
Are you ready to go shopping?
To get the money? Where's the money?
Dale's Supermarket Sweep meant that you finally had something decent to watch when you were off school sick. Sick, in inverted commas so large they look like bunny ears. Eurotrash appeared on Channel 4 and added to their edgy reputation, being that show that your mum definitely didn't want you to watch, which made it way more appealing than it actually was, being filled, as it was, with mostly actual trash, but in a French accent.
Recently, the European community finally agreed on the standard proportions for the Euro condom.
The Power Rangers happened in 1993, and this was a really bold move. Kids' TV'd always been a thinly veiled excuse to advertise toys. We all knew that, from Transformers and He-Man through Turtles. But I'd never seen the actual toys themselves used as the primary props in the show. That was pretty ballsy. And in the same year that Star Trek Deep Space Nine premiered on Sky One, we got Pound Stretcher's own brand Star Trek, but underwater.
The 21st century, mankind has colonized the last unexplored region on Earth, the ocean. As captain of the Sequest and its crew, we are its guardians, for beneath the surface lies the future.
The absolute definition of we have Star Trek at home. On the gaming front, the success of Games Master spawned Games World on Sky, which replicated some of the energy but severely lacked the quality, and I remember it just trying way too hard to be cool. Plus it was on every single night of the week, which was a bit much. Still, the Videators were pretty fun.
Let's see who you're going to be playing. Press the button.
The Videator who will challenge you is Mr. Mathers, the megabyte millionaire. He's the mean machine, making millions from his video game empire. Can you control this corporate killer?
From our perspective here, there's no shortage of great games coming out in 1993, so let's get into it. So it's fair to say games had been fully established in the culture as what the kids like these days. And later on we're going to go looking at an entirely different platform in the PC. Gaming was changed entirely by the release of Doom this year. And while that game didn't invent the first-person shooter entirely, it certainly provided the basis for how they would all be in the coming years, to the point that the genre became all-dominant in the gaming space for a while. Plus, the first level came free on a shareware disc, so every single person with a PC played that level over and over again. It was never really my thing though. The consoles were still going strong too, with Star Fox or Star Wing here in Europe being released on the SNES and demonstrating real-time rendered 3D graphics for the very first time on this generation of machines. It was really impressive though, let's be honest, the frame rate. Oh, that frame rate though. It was like watching a snail run a zoetrope. Look it up, it was like a flipbook on a wheel, it was a thing. Seriously though, it looks like browsing through Fox McCloud's holiday snaps, and that level of slowdown made it a bit of a chore to play. We also saw one of the best looking games of the generation in Disney's Aladdin, famously animated by some of the same team that made the film. This really showed how games were being taken more seriously by heavy hitters in Hollywood, rather than just being a throwaway toy to chuck on the pile with the plushies and the lunchboxes. Still, doesn't quite make it onto my list thanks to a bit of a steep difficulty curve and some frustrating level design. If you've played that Magic Carpet level, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So for our first game today, there's a truly superb sequel to look at on the good old Mega Drive. Guess who's back? Back again. Axel's back. But we won't be playing as him because we have our beloved Beefy Boy now. Yeah, get fucked, Axel. They didn't half churn these sequels out in the 90s, didn't they? It took them a few months to turn this around, obviously. After the success of Streets of Rage in 91, of course they were going to do another one. But despite the obvious cash grab nature of Streets of Rage 2, it sits comfortably as the best one in the series. But why? Well, first of all, there's been a significant jump in visual quality, and look, we were all graphics whores back then. It was the primary way in which new games were advertised to us. We couldn't help it. The sprites are larger and more detailed, the environments are more varied and have more unique features and fewer repeating elements. So the overall presentation felt even closer to an arcade experience of the time. There's also a more significant variation in gameplay styles between the increased number of playable characters. So White Guy and Girl Guy return from the original and represent a kind of central normal gameplay style, albeit split between being a bit stronger or a bit quicker, respectively. But then you've got Beefy Boy and Skater Boy, providing a more extreme deviation from that middle in terms of having an ultra powerful and slow, or an ultra fast and weak approach, respectively. All the characters get a new suite of unique moves too, so each time you play through it can feel like a substantially different experience. Skate can run and torpedo guys, Max has a cool floor slide, Axel has a multi-hit combo, and Blaze has a powerful forward cartwheel, for example, and each of these are more or less effective against different enemy types. And these moves are necessary to a degree because the Karens from HR have been onto them and told them they can't fire heavy ordnance into populated areas anymore, killjoys. So there aren't any screen clearing special support attacks this time around, instead you get a more traditional super move that drains a bit of your health, more like Final Fight. It's worth mentioning too just how of its time this game is. We've talked previously about how big a craze the wrestling was in this period, so just dumping a full-on WWF wrestler in his wrestling gear into a game about fighting through the streets of thugs is very 1993. But Skate actually might just be the most era-specific character ever created. Named after his single defining characteristic, Skate exists because rollerblading was at its absolute peak in 1993. Roller skates? No, that's so 80s, man. Rollerblades. That's the 90s. That's now. That's hip. You took a roller skate, basically, and put all the wheels in a single little straight line. More like an ice skate. And suddenly you had an all-encompassing obsession for adolescents and teens in the mid-90s. It's one of those really daft things that we should never have imported from America, because it simply didn't work outside the US. It's all well and good watching footage of people speeding along sun-drenched streets and roads in California, where absolutely everything is tarmacked, but the streets in the UK look like this. So the 90s were full of young people in insanely brightly coloured t-shirts and shorts, essentially walking timidly along the streets in rollerblades. I was fortunate though, I had the Plaza in Tynemouth, That was one of those wonderful arcades we've talked about previously, where you could play Simpsons and WrestleFest and G-Lock upstairs, as well as having the odd game of pool. But then downstairs they had a roller rink. Congratulations, by the way, if you're one of the girls in this photograph, because it seems you are in the only existing picture of the Tynemouth Plaza roller rink that exists in the world, or at least easily searchable on the internet. I only know I haven't made this whole thing up because of this here. I remember my dad used to take me on a Sunday, and it was really dark in there, and they played really good music like a sort of kid disco, and it was genuinely the only suitably large area of smooth floor in the entire region where you could actually use those expensive skates, aside from just pushing yourself from counter to counter in your kitchen, which obviously I did. You could also just sit around the outside of the rink, drinking the most disgusting off-brand cola and or lemonade you've ever had in your life, after you got knackered after 10 minutes of skating, you know. Great times. Another way you know Streets of Rage 2 is of its time is that it's batshit mental. It really goes off the reservation in the middle, ditching the more grounded and realistic street brawling with thugs in favour of magic invisible ninjas and literal aliens. Actual aliens, as in aliens from the Aliens franchise. Not sure exactly how they got away with that one. There's no explanation, of course, aside from cocaine, and there are signs later on that they maybe had started to run out of ideas. Even by 93, the lift or elevator level had become a bit of a trope, and there are no fewer than 4 of these in this game, which by the 4th one is really testing your patience. Some nice details from the first one are also missing here, such as the horizontal swing of the large melee weapons. Now you actually do have to be in the same horizontal plane as the enemies for those attacks to connect, which is a bit of a shame given how impressive that first one was in that regard. These are small niggles though in a game that overall eased the difficulty down slightly and hugely increased the speed, visual presentation and variety to give us a game that still remains one of the most fun experiences you can have with a side-scrolling beat-em-up. Streets of Rage 2 is comfortably the best of the series, and easily here on the 121 best games of all time. So the Mega Drive was starting to get a little long in the tooth in 1993. It's worth remembering that the idea of a console generation lasting the thick end of a decade is a relatively new one. Back in the early days, technology was advancing at such a pace that generations were generally expected to be around 4 to 5 years, and the Mega Drive is 4 at this point. Even the SNES, which is a year younger, was starting to show its age given how it was struggling to run Starwing, which was very clearly the way the future was going in terms of 3D graphics. Basically, the signs were pointing towards a new refresh of hardware across the board, but nobody was ready to jump at a new machine just yet, so we saw some really interesting ways of extending the lifespan of the current tech, particularly from Sega. Cartridges as a storage medium were really out of date at this point too, and as difficult as it might be to believe now, the entire world was orienting itself towards the humble compact disc, or CD, as the physical medium of choice. It was already being widely used in the world of the PC. Philips had released the CDI in 1991, a sort of multimedia machine, and people had seen how much storage could be increased using this technology.
A single CD can hold as much information as 80 cartridges or a staggering 800 floppy disks.
You could have movies and music and photos on CDs, which meant there was a lot of potential for making much larger and more complex games. So this is what Sega focused on, releasing the Mega CD in the US in 1992 as the Sega CD, and in Europe as the Mega CD, its proper name, in 1993. It was an add-on for the Mega Drive, so you needed a Mega Drive to use one, but it meant that you could use your existing setup to play CD-based games that held the promise of fully recorded music soundtracks, fully voiced characters, and full-motion video footage, as well as some modest advancements in processing power that ultimately would never really be used. It was a very pricey machine and a gamble at the time because there wasn't a lot of software available for it, but it felt like the future to me. I was so excited about it. It's difficult to communicate these days because each new hardware iteration now is such a minor improvement over the last one. The law of diminishing returns has completely taken over computer entertainment in 2024, but in 1993 this was a massive leap forward. But what did I play on this magical machine from the future?
Take off.
A port of an old Mega Drive game from 1991, obviously. Look, the machine was expensive, okay? I wasn't going to be rushing out and buying a load of new games for it. I had to milk every bit of enjoyment I could out of the 2 pack-in games that came in the box. And one of them was this side-scrolling space shooter called Feace. I've never liked shooters. I just never got into them. I always found them too difficult. As a wuss, wimp, kiddie, filthy casual, every shooter seemed to me to be an exercise in getting through the first couple of minutes, then dying, losing all your power-ups, and then it being impossible to make up the ground, as the number of enemies and bullets on screen became increasingly unhinged. And on top of all that, there usually wasn't even a compelling narrative pushing me to get better and go further. No promise of any cool end screens or story beats, so I never really stuck at one. Until this one. To my own benefit, I was kind of forced to stick at this one. The other pack-in game with the CD was Cobra Command, which was a good showcase of the visuals of the Mega CD, as it was essentially an interactive anime cartoon, but it was very short and quite limited in its actual interactivity, which meant I spent the majority of my time playing this one, learning the enemy patterns, learning where to put my ship and at what time, using the music as a timing guide, and ultimately understanding why other people had been enjoying shooters all along. I started to get it. Now let's not get it twisted, I was still utter shite at it. I never got past the 3rd stage, and a lot of what drove me on was not just the feeling of learning and getting better, but also the fact that the CD technology allowed for a much more appealing presentation than I was used to. The game opens with this extended anime sequence, with the main characters preparing the ship, and they had real voices. Real voices were a big deal on a home console in 1993.
We could be in for a battle with the Star Garrison at 5 locations on our way to Earth. Be on the lookout when we're near Sirius. The weapons plant on the outer rim of Sirius, the artificial sun, the Pluto base in Jupiter.
There was a fully narrated backstory about this killer, oppressive AI, and the story and characters really drew me in a way I'd never experienced in a shooter before. These were all additions specifically for this CD version, as was the absolutely banging soundtrack. I mean, listen to some of this. You wanted to play the game just to listen to these tracks, they were so good, and the whole thing just felt like a next level gaming experience. It's worth mentioning that the difficulty was also rather more forgiving than I was used to in contemporary shooters. Each time you lost a life, the game gave you some immediate power-ups to get you more or less back to where you were in terms of the power level, not entirely, but mostly, which kept the game feeling fair for longer, and it was usually relatively simple to learn the patterns of the bosses. Also, there were no additional complexities like enemies that are only vulnerable to particular weapons, like what you'd find in an Ikaruga or something like that. So you could just concentrate on shooting and evading. I appreciated that simplicity as a novice to the genre, and it kept play sessions more fun than annoying. This is another one of those time and place selections, and Feace isn't going to feature on a lot of people's list of the best games of all time. But it's on mine because I appreciate it as an on-ramp for shooters in general, and it was a nice introduction to some of the advancements made possible by the Mega CD, particularly in the soundtrack department. It's definitely worth checking out over the original Mega Drive version.
There's a lot going on in this house.
Never know who might drop in.
I think they're vampires or something.
Now listen up.
The Augs are here.
They're like a vampire.
We're going in.
This is my favorite bedroom.
Your mission?
So, what's happening tonight, Dad?
Protect those girls from whatever happened to the last ones.
Well, we have bottled the 2 downstairs, and Sarah's coming in with 6 more tonight.
Hidden cameras in almost every room and a series of traps.
We all have our own very special cravings around here.
But make sure you don't trap someone who should be protected.
Oh god, oh no, here we go. Oh, okay, some controversy, here we go. How do you even talk about Night Trap now? I mean, the US Congress made a taxpayer-funded ad for it so many years ago now, and said everything you need to know.
Night Trap uses actual actors and achieves an unprecedented level of realism.
It has been quite a leap from Pac-Man to Night Trap.
I mean, there are obviously sexual overtones operating there to a large degree.
There are many magazines out on the market, like the several I brought in here today. These magazines are filled with game tips on how to play the game.
If you don't have the brains or guts for this mission, then give control to someone who does. You can go into a Toys R Us store or a Walmart or a Kmart, and you know as well as I do that you can buy this product.
So 10 out of 10 masterpiece, obviously. It's funny watching that stuff now. Everyone thinks that moron politicians trying to ban things they haven't even done the basic research about is some kind of new idea. It's not. It's literally all they've ever been capable of.
These games teach a child to enjoy inflicting torture.
Night Trap, which adds a new dimension of violence specifically targeted against women, is especially repugnant. It ought to be taken off the market entirely.
It is a sick, disgusting video game, in my judgment. Shame on people that produce that trash. It's child abuse, in my judgment.
There is depictions, I believe, although it's hard to prove, but my perception of homophobia operating. I think that there are also things about race in terms of black and color issues.
The fascist Night Trap will never appear on a Nintendo system.
So this game, along with Mortal Kombat, is the reason we have an age rating system for games. So shocking was the content. Party! So distasteful and horrific was the boundary pushing of this bang average B-movie PG-13 level schlock horror film that they repurposed into barely a video game. Not long ago, in my capacity as a university lecturer, I actually had to explain to a group of students what an interactive movie actually was, such as the decline of the genre these days. So if you don't know, this was the birth of a genre known as the interactive movie, in which there would be a fully filmed movie, a proper film, with proper actors, real actors and everything, sets, just like a film. But every now and then, the player would be required to do something to make the film continue. Maybe you had to time a button press or select a direction. But if you failed, the film would end prematurely and that would be game over. Depending on the complexity of the game, they might have filmed multiple different narrative paths that would occur, depending on the player's choice, though that was relatively rare. More often than not, you were just trying to get to the end of a pretty linear story. This is an extension of the old Dragon's Lair and Space Ace games, and the primary and possibly only appeal was the fact that these were not pixelated characters. They were real people, real actors. It was an actual film and you were controlling it. That was a massive leap from the cartoony platformers and puzzle games that had come before it on the home consoles. To say it was mind-blowing is an understatement, and you'd be tempted to just put it on to watch the technological marvel playing out in front of you, and not even play the game. Even though the video quality on the Mega CD was pretty shocking, and took place entirely inside a tiny box, taking up easily less than half the screen. But it was the future, damn it, and we loved it.
Relax! Pretend it's a game.
Gameplay-wise, here in Night Trap you had a house, with 8 different camera feeds to choose from, representing different areas of that house. Over the course of an evening, a group of young girls having a sleepover are trying to stay alive amid a huge number of monsters, also known as blokes in black hazmat suits, and your job is to press buttons at the right time in the right place to trap those monsters using the inbuilt booby traps in the house. Every time an ARG, the monsters in question, goes near a trap and you fail to trigger it, it adds to the total. and if you reach an unacceptably low ratio of trapped to missed arcs, the game ends quite abruptly.
Alright, you got this far, but there's still way too many of those zombies running around that you should have trapped. Now, if Kelly's gonna get out of there alive, you've got to do better than that. Nobody said this job was gonna be a piece of cake. Maybe next time you'll make it all the way. Yeah, I'm talking to you.
There are other ways to fail as you progress through the story, with key characters involved in specific scenes you can't afford to miss. And every now and then, someone in the family will change the access code to the traps.
Jeffrey, I want you to go downstairs and change the trap access code from blue to green.
This is set to random, so you can't rely on memorizing the order of the code changes. You have to make sure you hear the dialogue in which they say what the new code is.
Come on, Studley, we better change that code. How about red? Sure.
All of this means that the game essentially becomes an exercise in repetition, so you can memorize where all the arcs are and at what time. You also have to memorize when you have to be in each location to overhear key information. And it means that you rarely get to sit back and actually enjoy the unfolding story with the twists and turns of this family of, spoiler alert, vampires, with all their backstory and motivations. So it's entirely possible, in fact, it's pretty much necessary the first few times through, to finish the game without having much of an idea about what's actually going on. Regardless of all those niggles and limitations, this still felt like playing something from the future. As a kid, I loved films, and I never imagined someone would put me in control of how one unfolds. Regardless of how illusory that impression was, it was hugely impactful. And I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a massive appeal in being something a bit naughty, a bit forbidden. All the controversy over it made it so desirable. It felt like something insanely boundary pushing, despite the fact that there's no swearing, no nudity, and barely any violence in it. I was 10 or 11 years old in 1993, and I would go to extreme lengths to get my hands on something a bit titillating, especially if I wasn't really supposed to have it. You should never underestimate the power of that, especially in the days before internet pornography took all the thrill and challenge out of that kind of thing. This game lived in my mind for many years after, even as better examples of the interactive movie and better narrative-driven games came along, because it has all the charm of one of the very earliest examples of something brand new. It's sincere in its schlockery. It means every word it says. It's not trying to be clever or subversive. It's not even trying to be controversial. It's just trying to be entertaining. And it's a spectacular failure, like one scene from space, which is enough to make it one of the 121 best games of all time for me. Also, you can now play it in far higher quality on Steam, which I highly recommend.
First thing you think of? Party! Music!
So as the consoles thrash around trying to extend their lifespan, a new, for me, challenger arrives on the scene to provide an entirely new and different experience of gaming: the PC. In 1993, we were in the infancy of everyone needing a PC at home for reasons of productivity. Computers were an expensive luxury, but they promised more than just gaming. You could write letters on it and make spreadsheets, so you could do accounting and stuff. Basically, it meant you could con your parents into thinking you needed one and that it wasn't really about gaming. It would help you with your homework. But of course the games were the highlight, and there was an entire world of them that simply weren't available on consoles. These days there's almost no distinction between PC and console gaming, but back then they were home to very different experiences. For long play sessions of strategy and tactics, the PC was really the only way, targeting a slightly older audience with more mature and complex games, many of which could only really be played with a mouse and keyboard anyway. So I convinced my parents we needed a PC, and we went to SCOM in North Shields to buy it, which I'm almost certain existed, though I can't find photographic evidence of it. It was a German company. They opened a bunch of shops in the UK in the mid and early 90s, and one of them was in North Shields. It's wild I could even get that in Shields. North Shields was and is a very small town. We had a McDonald's, and that really was the highlight. We had a little bank, a little Presto, which was a supermarket, a couple of bakers, and then this weird German computer company set up a shop inside our little shopping centre. SCOM would go out of business not long after this, a trend that would continue with things I bought throughout my life, but I vividly remember that the PC was a Pentium 60 MHz, which was the absolute sexiest thing at the time. It had a CD drive that I seem to remember was a 4x speed. Again, a very nice spec for the time. And it had a Sound Blaster card with speakers. It's mad how much I remember about the specifics of this computer off the top of my head. But it was a big piece of kit, and it felt like a very special purchase. Playing games on PC back then wasn't all that straightforward, to be honest. It was an outright gamble whether or not a game would work on your machine. So when they did work, it felt like a real achievement. But it opened up an entirely new world to me, and one of the earliest of those experiences was my first ever go of a football management simulation. It was called On the Ball, and it's also German. I've been thinking recently, doing these retro reviews, about imagination. Imagination was a really important aspect of playing games in this era. Before graphics were photorealistic and every detail of every facet of every magical world was modelled to an insane degree, we had to imagine what a lot of these worlds were like, based on a suggestion. These games gave us a flavour, and we built the rest in our minds, which made it personal. I've always thought that while games, particularly ones driven by narrative, are often compared to films, I think the experience of playing games has always been closer to reading a novel. Because you return to it over multiple sessions, and because of this aspect of using your imagination to construct a world around the explicitly depicted action. One of the earliest strong memories I have of this is On the Ball. It has all the basic features you'd expect from a football management sim today, to be honest. You have the Premier League, which was brand new at the time, of course, plus the league below. You pick your team, mess about with tactics like whether you want to be attacking or cautious, whether you want to go crunching in hard with tackles or be a bit more gentle. You choose a penalty and a free kick taker, and then the match plays out. You can even get into negotiating with advertisers and developing the stadium, which teeters into God Sim territory. What I love about it, though, is the impressionistic vibe of everything. The cartoon animation during the matches and the hand-drawn art style depicting your office and the whole world around it really leaned into this being a fantasy. I remember not playing as Newcastle United on purpose because they existed in my real life. I wanted to escape into a fantasy I could mould entirely myself, so I chose a club at random, which in the event happened to be Queen's Park Rangers. There was no reason for that club, I recall, other than perhaps it's based in London, which couldn't be further from Newcastle in absolutely every sense, even to this day, so it gave me a blank canvas. As I pulled together a squad with new signings, I imagined what the press conferences would be like announcing them. I imagined the local news bulletins carrying footage of them wearing the shirt, the queues in the club shop wanting the name on the back of their own shirts. I imagined what Lineker, Hansen and Lawrenson would say about our performances on Match of the Day, what I might write in the programme about the week before. As I built up the stadium with new stands and new facilities, I imagined the fans arriving on a Saturday. I specifically recall, actually, drawing a picture of what I thought the main entrance to the largest stand would look like, complete with this grand glass facade and a comically oversized club crest. I say all this just to point out how much of a gaming experience can actually not be in the game at all. This was something new now I was playing PC games, which on the whole tended to be more strategically and narratively rich, while still being constrained by the technological limitations of the time. It was a broadening world of gaming for me, and not all of it came inside those glorious big cardboard boxes. This game also had a nice sense of humour about the world of football in general, something that was lost along the way somewhere as all these modern interpretations became very po-faced and serious about a bunch of lads kicking a ball about. Look at this here, one of my players is trying to shake me down for more money. Not today, pal. See, he was trying it on, cheeky bastard. And here, the Prime Minister likes my team, so we lose fans. That's pretty funny. And the thing is, football is funny. At least it used to be.
What's happened, Chris?
I don't know, Jim.
Anthony Van Den Boer has been sent off for a second bookable offence.
Get your fingers out and count up the number of Portsmouth players who are on the field.
No, you're right. I saw him go off, and I thought they were bringing a sub on, Jeff.
My mum would have washed my mouth out with soap, like she used to when I was little. It just don't work, to be fair. I could eat a bar of soap and I swear like a trooper, so I don't know what she was trying to achieve.
Palace have scored 24 goals this season. He is on loan at Trabzonspor, and he has scored 24 goals this season. Yeah.
Man, you can't blame Palace for that. If you'd have seen him, you'd have played yourself.
It's supposed to be entertainment, and the entertainment products built around it, like the TV coverage and the video games, used to reflect this. There was one FIFA where there was a button input that would make your player dive. You can't do that now, despite the fact that diving is a huge part of the modern game. So I miss this playful approach to football.
It will never be finally decided who has won the football. There is still everything to play for and forever to play it in.
It's nice and cosy in the world of On the Ball. You can build an entire comfy fantasy around the skeleton of a decently detailed management sim, and it's well worth playing today. As PC gaming was opening up these brand new kinds of experiences to me, I had my very first encounter with what would go on to be one of my absolute favourite genres, and one that, like the interactive movie, has all but died out: the point-and-click adventure game. I know, boring. Yes, a video game that had no test of reactions or skill or timing, just whether or not you could puzzle out the solutions to obscure problems using an inventory of seemingly unrelated objects, together with a limited selection of verb commands like use, look, open, pick up, etc. This was a brand new thing, and it appealed to me as a kid who was pretty good at school but also tended to take my time over things. I didn't like being rushed, and it took me a little longer to do things because of a little touch of OCD probably. We called it perfectionism back then, but it was the same thing. So it's like they made a genre of games specifically for me. I could take my time, I could think about it, I could experiment with different ideas without worrying about dying. Because you see, my preferred purveyors of point-and-click were LucasArts. There were essentially two schools of adventure game in the mid-90s, LucasArts games and Sierra games, and they represented different philosophies. LucasArts games were the relaxed ones that gave you essentially infinite time to figure things out, and there was no way to lock yourself into a no-win scenario or a game over. Sierra, on the other hand, took more inspiration from traditional video games, and made it not just possible for your character to die, it was often quite difficult to avoid. This is why I never really went in for stuff like Space Quest, despite loving Star Trek. Ultimately, it was the LucasArts games that came to define the era, with really famous releases like the Monkey Island games, Sam & Max Hit the Road, and this, probably my favourite adventure game of all time, Day of the Tentacle.
It's from my old friend, Green Tentacle. He says that Purple Tentacle's mutated into an insane genius, and Dr. Fred's going to kill them both. I thought I was free of Dr. Fred and those crazy Edisons forever. But now, I know that I must go back to the mansion.
This is a sequel to a game called Maniac Mansion from 1987, which many people cite as the very first point-and-click because they took the old text-based command line adventure games and translated it into a visual mouse-based interface instead of having to type. This made it feel more interactive and streamlined the experience, and as graphical power continued to accelerate, the adventures could look more and more impressive. Day of the Tentacle is a fantastic showcase of the cartoon art style that defined not just LucasArts games of the time, but also a lot of kids' TV, particularly from Nickelodeon. Rocko's Modern Life debuted, in the UK at least, this year, and slotting it alongside shows like Ren and Stimpy and Rugrats, it's clearly no coincidence that the art style is similarly full of these Burton-esque surrealist perspective in the environments and exaggerated features on the characters. This was the style at the time, as they say, and it did create an otherworldliness that was and continues to be very appealing in terms of escapism.
Hey, wanna see a neat trick?
Sure.
Neat, huh?
My Pony Express stamps. You'll ruin my Pony Express stamps, not to mention 5 years of therapy.
Of course, these games live or die on whether the story is funny/compelling enough, and whether the puzzles are on the right side of either interesting and challenging, or stupid and frustrating. And in my view, this game manages to be both satisfying and funny enough to make it a compelling adventure.
I've never gotten over my childhood fear of Uzo.
While maybe not being as funny as Sam and Max, the puzzles make more sense and you'll spend less time getting frustrated at a lack of progress than either that game or the Monkey Island adventures. The main hook of this game is that the three protagonists have been stuck in different time periods, past, present and future, exploring the same house in those areas and trying to get everyone back to the present. That means scouring comedy iterations of history, interacting with George Washington and Benjamin Franklin.
Whoa, you're like George Washington. Very much like him, according to my wife, Mrs. Washington.
As well as a dystopian future ruled by the tentacles.
I have to go to the bathroom.
Ha, that's a good one. Imagine a human using a bathroom. Come on, let's take a walk. Okay, human, do your business.
To gather up all the required objects, some of which may be needed to solve puzzles in a different era. If that's the case, you can flush these items through time to your companions and figure out what needs to be used where and when. There are even some fun time travel mechanics, such as cutting down a tree in the past so you don't get stuck in it in the future, and putting some wine in a time capsule so it can turn into vinegar in the future. This is all wrapped up in a relaxed and jovial tone that makes enough fun of itself to be endearing without veering into try-hard, and the adventure wraps up before it outstays its welcome, making it, in my opinion, one of the best adventure games ever made.
Mr. President, may I offer you an excellent smoke? Can you also provide me with a light? Sure. Well, in that case... Blast, I hate it when that happens.
It really speaks to the quality of it that I have played this game through to completion more than a dozen times since my first go in 1993, and I love it each and every time. Like many of the most iconic games of the time, there's a new shiny HD re-release available on modern machines, and there's nothing wrong with that, I suppose, but in the spirit of what I mentioned earlier about imagination and allowing a game to seep into your mind and become an escapist fantasy like a book, I would recommend playing it in its original, more pixelated form. The clearer and more polished games like this look, the less magic they have for me. But however you experience it, if you haven't played this one, you really should. And that was 1993. A really important year, actually, now I look back at it. I think... Wait. Oh, hang on. Okay, hang on. We're going straight into 1994. But there's only one game on the list for 1994, so we're going to have to do this quick, okay? Alright, 1994 Speedrun. Go. The day-to-day skewered trash TV journalism. Nothing's really changed except how nobody calls it out anymore.
welcome. On the day-to-day tonight, Portillo's wife defends crack habit.
It's cheap, very cheap.
Don't forget your toothbrush took that awesome big breakfast energy and put it in prime time. And the National Lottery starts, giving everyone living ever since the mistaken impression that they'd one day be rich.
Look after your ticket and an estimated £2 million could be yours.
It's you.
It could be you.
So, to the games. Sonic 3 happened. No. Too long. Sonic looks weird. Also the barrel. Earthworm Jim, really good looking, like insanely good looking, but too frustrating for me. Earthbound, I know you all love it, I never played it. But I did play UFO Enemy Unknown, also known as XCOM.
Warning, warning, UFO detected.
Oh wow, what a great intro. Man, I'm hyped. I'm ready to go and kick some alien butt. Yeah, let's do it. Just FYI, that's not going to happen. So from one game that is relaxing and easygoing, to one of the most brutally difficult and unfair experiences it was possible to have on the PC in 1994. Aside from trying to stay on the internet while your family insisted on using the phone. UFO Enemy Unknown was the very first entry in what we all know now as the XCOM franchise, and it was yet another brand new experience for me. The scope of the game felt impossibly large, in the sense that the first thing that happens is you're presented with an entire globe, and you have to pick where to base your operations. Before you've tried and failed a few times, you don't realise that the only sensible choice is the east coast of the USA. So you plonk it down in Newcastle, why not? From there, you're tasked with running a worldwide military initiative to repel an alien invasion, using attack aircraft and ground assaults with troops. You need to build facilities and sensor arrays, research new technology, capture and study alien technology to replicate and look after a staff of scientists, mechanics and soldiers. Nothing I'd ever played on a console had ever allowed that many levels of depth, complexity and varied gameplay. The basic game loop is that you shoot down an enemy ship in the overworld view, and then you send a ground crew to clean up the mess. This takes you to a turn-based isometric tactical combat scenario in which you use your soldiers to kill or capture the remaining aliens and recover all the artifacts. But that is a lot easier said than done, as the aliens are extremely smart and brutally dangerous, but not quite as dangerous as the misleading statistics. You see, each time you have an alien in your sights, you get a number of options on how to take it down. You can take an aimed shot, which has a higher percentage chance to hit, but you can only take one of these per turn. Whereas you could have 2 or maybe even more snapshots, which are quicker but less accurate. A missed shot usually leaves your crew devastatingly exposed, so these are important choices, and you are regularly treated to an unlikely miss from an above 90% hit chance, which doesn't feel great. The first time you play this, there is absolutely zero chance of winning. The game brutalizes you. They can't miss. You can't hit a cow's ass with a banjo. Every member of your squad is Ray Charles. You've got no chance at all. You get thoroughly routed and you reload the game. But next time, you're more cautious. You let them come to you. You take your time. You put your squad in Overwatch. And maybe you make it back with some crew members left intact. And some new tech to study. And then you're off. You can make this experience even more tense and harrowing if you rename your squad to people you know in real life. Which of course, I always did. And the experience system that gives your troops promotions and stat boosts for every kill and completed mission can really turn the screws on you when you make a bad call, or get done with a missed shot and lose one or more of your most experienced sergeants. This encourages you to switch up your roster to keep some safe while others are in the line of fire, so you actually start thinking like a general. Don't get attached. Don't do it. Once you complete a mission, you can research the things that you recover to develop new weapons, armor, and even aircraft, and that's the really addictive part of this game. Once you start harvesting the fruits of that hard labour on the ground, you start to see the tables turn. Your soldiers can take more hits in better armour, they can dole out more punishment with alien laser technology, and you start being able to down their ships with next to no effort. You can even give your soldiers weird alien mind powers at one point, and you start to feel like you've earned enough tangible benefits that you can start to be in charge of the war. I got really invested in the journey from plucky defensive underdog to dominant military power, and it was a level of rewarding I hadn't previously experienced. The loop gets some fun variation thrown in from time to time too. The aliens can invade your base, for example, which means you have to launch a ground mission inside your own headquarters. The nice touch here is that the isometric map is really modelled on the layout of your base. Wherever you've put each facility on the site map is actually reflected in the layout of the fight. The aliens can also launch terror attacks in particular countries, and how you respond with your limited resources can affect how much funding each nation's willing to continue to provide your project, so there's politics involved. There's also a balance between how much stuff you get on a mission you keep to research, and how much you might want to sell on the black market to plug those holes in funding where certain countries have pulled out, or in some cases, maybe have even been taken over by aliens. There's actually more detail and more micromanagement involved in this game than in the modern XCOM games, which means while the games have become more user-friendly and accessible, they've sacrificed complexity and therefore to some degree immersion. Going back to this game today is brutally difficult, but it's tough to beat in terms of a fully featured simulation. So you can see the mission summary here. This isn't how it's supposed to go. You can see that what I actually did here was I watched an alien craft land somewhere in England, and then essentially gave them one of my aircraft by sending all my guys in to get murdered. That's not how it's supposed to go, ideally. The XCOM franchise actually contains a lot of my favourite games of all time, and we're going to talk about more of these as the videos continue, but this was the first and arguably the purest, and is well worth its place in the top 121 games of all time, despite how angry it can make you. And that's actually the end now. 1994 was very brief, but what can I say? It was a weak year. We're going to take a little detour next month with a Christmas special, where we'll briefly emerge from the past into the present and talk a little bit about 2024. But we'll be back in the past soon enough in the new year, when 1995 rolls around. See you next time on Promotional Whitenoise.
Just wait till tomorrow.